I want you to picture, just for a moment, the most iconic, flawlessly executed cinematic masterpiece of the 20th century.
Oh, that's a big question, but yeah, naturally, The Godfather comes to mind right away.
Exactly. I mean, you think of the dark, brooding cinematography, the swelling, tragic score, the absolute gravity of Marlon Brando and Al Pacino.
Right, it just feels so ordained, like it was carved into stone tablets and handed down from the cinematic heavens.
It really does. But what if you knew that behind the scenes, it was basically a chaotic, low-budget disaster that spent its entire production on the brink of total collapse?
I mean, it genuinely shatters the illusion of how we view classic cinema. We look at The Godfather now as this monumental, serious achievement,
Yeah.
but the reality of its creation, as Peter Biskind outlines in his exhaustive book, The Godfather Companion, is basically a masterclass in panic, corporate sabotage, and just pure, unadulterated absurdity.
It's wild.
If you knew what was happening behind the camera, you would honestly wonder how a single usable frame of film was ever developed.
And so that is our mission for this deep dive. We are taking a massive magnifying glass to the making of this film, using Biskind's incredible sources.
Definitely.
We want to explore how a deeply indebted underdog director, an entirely unwanted cast, and a completely hostile studio somehow managed to accidentally stumble their way into creating film history.
Right, because to really grasp the magnitude of what Francis Ford Coppola achieved, you first have to understand just how appallingly low Paramount Pictures' expectations were from day one.
Yeah, when they think of Paramount backing this massive epic, we just assume they knew what they had, right?
Oh, totally. But they didn't view Mario Puzo's novel as a crown jewel at all. They viewed it as a nuisance.
Wow, a nuisance.
A cheap nuisance at that. I mean, Gulf and Western, the massive corporate conglomerate that had recently purchased Paramount, they were only looking at the bottom line.
Right, it's all about the money.
Exactly. Executives like Robert Evans and Stanley Jaffer were dealing with the conventional wisdom of the era, which basically dictated that mafia dramas simply did not play to audiences.
Which seems so crazy to us now.
It does. But the studio had just suffered a massive financial blow with a mob movie called The Brotherhood, starring Kirk Douglas.
Oh, right. I remember hearing about that one. It totally tanked, didn't it?
It was an unmitigated disaster at the box office. The public just didn't buy a cleft-chinned Hollywood golden boy playing a Sicilian gangster.
Makes sense.
But the studio executives took away the absolute wrong lesson from it. They basically concluded the entire mafia genre was dead.
So because of that, their initial concept for The Godfather was essentially an exercise in damage control, right?
Exactly. I mean, they budgeted the film at a paltry $1 million.
$1 million for The Godfather.
Just $1 million. And to keep costs down, they wanted it to be a modern-day production.
Wait, modern day, like set in the 70s?
Yes. They were pitching the idea of shooting it on this studio backlot in Los Angeles, or maybe outsourcing it to a cheaper city like St. Louis or Kansas City.
That is just bizarre.
They essentially wanted something akin to a cheap, disposable FBI television series of the week.
I mean, imagine trying to stage Shakespeare's Macbeth, but your corporate producers insist on doing it as a budget high school sitcom because they simply refuse to pay for medieval costumes and castle sets.
That is the perfect analogy. It is that severe of a conceptual mismatch.
And it gets crazier. The studio's line producer on the project, Albert Reddy, he was the executive responsible for managing the actual daily physical and financial operations on the ground. He ran the numbers, right?
Yeah, he did. He figured it would cost an extra $1 million just to make the film a period piece set in the 1940s, which is, when Mario Puzo's novel actually takes place.
Because you need vintage cars, specific wardrobe, period-accurate set dressing, all of that.
Exactly. And Paramount was vehemently against spending that money. They were aiming for a quick 90-minute contemporary mob flick to capitalize on whatever fleeting buzz the novel had and nothing more.
So naturally, if you are treating a project like a budget-conscious throwaway, you certainly aren't looking for a visionary auteur to direct it.
Definitely not.
Which explains why Francis Ford Coppola was absolutely nowhere near their radar initially.
Right. Coppola wasn't their first choice, nor their second, nor even their 10th. 12 other directors actively passed on this movie before the script landed on his desk.
12! That's insane. And these were massive, influential names in Hollywood, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely. Arthur Penn, who was fresh off reinventing American cinema with Bonnie and Clyde, passed because he claimed he was too busy.
Wow.
Franklin Schaffner and Fred Zinnemann both rejected it on moral grounds. They felt the novel was far too sympathetic to the mafia and glorified criminals.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and Costa Gavras turned it down because he thought the story was too distinctly American for his sensibilities.
So they're just getting rejection after rejection.
Exactly. Peter Yates, Richard Brooks, the list of rejections was staggering. At one point, Albert Ruddy was heavily leaning towards Sidney J. Furie simply because Furie had directed a couple of cheap, efficient films for him in the past.
Okay, this raises a massive question about studio risk assessment for me. If Paramount was so incredibly terrified of losing money on this mob picture, why on earth did they entrust it to Coppola?
Well, it's a great question.
I mean, at 32 years old, his primary qualification seemed to be that he was flat broke and desperate.
Oh, he was incredibly desperate.
He was in the hole for $600,000 to Warner Brothers because they had just pulled the plug on his independent production company, American Zoetrope.
Yeah, the sheriff was quite literally at the door.
Plus, his track record was objectively terrible. His debut, a $40,000 horror movie called Dementia 13, famously earned a one-word review from the New York Times.
Dismal.
It's true. But to understand the studio's logic, you really have to look at the economic leverage they thought they were getting.
Okay, break that down for me.
So Coppola's desperation was actually his greatest asset in the eyes of the corporate moneymen. They analyzed a movie he directed in 1968, Finian's Rainbow, starring Fred Astaire, the musical.
Yeah, the musical. It's a notoriously expensive genre, but Coppola managed to shoot it for only $3 million.
Oh, I see.
Right, so to the executives at Paramount, that signaled a director who knew how to stretch a dollar and cut corners.
And he also happened to be Italian-American.
Exactly. The studio figured hiring him would buy them some cheap PR to fend off the Italian-American Civil Rights League, giving the film a thin veneer of authenticity.
But the core motivation was absolutely financial control.
Without a doubt. In fact, Coppola initially rejected their lowball offer to write the screenplay.
Wait, really? He turned them down at first.
He did. It was George Lucas, who was serving as the vice president of Coppola's failing Zoetrope studio, who had to pull him aside and say, "Go ahead, Francis, we really need the money. What have you got to lose?"
That is wild. George Lucas is the reason we have The Godfather.
Basically, yeah. But the executives fundamentally miscalculated. They believed that a young director who had never helmed a hit and who was drowning in personal debt would be incredibly subservient.
They thought they could walk all over him.
Exactly. They assumed his desperation gave them absolute dictatorial power over the production. The plan was simple. Bring him in, tell him what to do, force him to shoot on the fake streets of the Los Angeles backlot, and extract a cheap thriller.
Yet the minute his signature was on the contract, Coppola completely flipped the script on them.
He absolutely did.
He immediately started battling the studio on every conceivable front, starting with the location. He and his production designer, Dean Tavaleres, pointed out that shooting on an LA backlot would look glaringly artificial.
Right, Tavaleres made a really great point. He noted that fake studio streets always dead-end in a sharp T intersection, and the facades are only 3 stories high.
Whereas authentic New York tenements are 5 or 6 stories.
Exactly. He basically shamed the studio executives by asking how many streets in the actual city of New York dead-end like a Hollywood set.
That's a brilliant, aggressive pushback. And Coppola's leverage dramatically increased when Mario Puzo's novel unexpectedly exploded into a cultural phenomenon.
Oh, it was massive. It sat on the bestseller list for 67 consecutive weeks, selling over 1 million hardcover copies before a single frame of the movie was shot.
So Paramount suddenly realized they weren't holding a cheap B-movie, they were holding a potential blockbuster.
Which changed everything. They were forced to upgrade the budget and commit to shooting on location in New York.
But surrendering the budget did not mean they were willing to surrender creative control.
Not even a little bit.
And that fundamental tension sparked what is arguably the most brutal, protracted battle of the entire production: assembling the cast.
Yes. The casting process was an absolute bloodbath. Because the studio desperately wanted a controllable, predictable movie, they naturally demanded a safe, bankable, easily marketable cast.
And Coppola, on the other hand, had heightened, dangerous, entirely unconventional ideas.
Completely different ideas.
Let's look at the war over the title character, the Don himself, Vito Corleone. Paramount was throwing out names that seem almost comical in retrospect.
They really do. They were seriously considering Richard Conte, Anthony Quinn, and Ralph Filoni.
They even floated Ernest Borgnine.
I know, right? And Robert Evans, who was operating as the head of worldwide production, went so far as to suggest Carlo Ponti.
Wait, Carlo Ponti wasn't even a working actor, was he?
No, he was a prolific Italian film producer who just happened to be married to Sophia Loren.
That is hilarious.
The studio just wanted anyone who brought a pre-existing sense of importance and European credibility without carrying any chaotic baggage.
Which translates to anyone but Marlon Brando.
Exactly. Anyone but Brando.
Because Coppola and his casting director, Fred Roos, had narrowed their ideal choices down to Laurence Olivier, George C. Scott, and Brando.
Right, because they understood a critical mechanism of cinema. The role of Vito Corleone required an actor with such gravitational pull, such immense inherent charisma that simply sitting quietly behind a desk felt like an event.
Yeah, that presence is so important.
And they deduced that if an actual Italian actor had reached the age of 70 without becoming world famous, he simply wouldn't possess that required aura of absolute authority.
But Olivier was dealing with a severe illness at the time, right?
Yeah, so that left Brando as Coppola's primary target. And interestingly, Mario Puzo had envisioned Brando in the role for years, even sending him a personal letter long before the film was greenlit.
But the studio brass, Robert Evans, Stanley Jaffa, and the head of Gulf and Western, Charles Bluedorn, they were apoplectic at the mention of Brando, weren't they?
Oh, they lost their minds. By the late 1960s, Marlon Brando was universally considered box office poison.
Really? Box office poison?
Completely. His reputation for eccentric, wildly disruptive behavior on the set of Mutiny on the Bounty was legendary tabloid fodder.
Oh, I see.
And his recent cinematic outings, like the surreal comedy Candy or the historical drama Burn, were massive commercial failures.
So the studio wanted absolutely nothing to do with him.
None. The studio line producer, Albert Ruddy, was so confident in Paramount's hatred for Brando that he actually bet Coppola $200 out of his own pocket that the executives would never approve the casting.
Wow. Paramount was so desperate to kill the idea that they essentially set up a roadblock they thought was impassable.
Right. They laid out 3 specific, non-negotiable conditions for Brando's employment.
Conditions they were absolutely certain an actor with Brando's towering ego and historical prestige would reject outright. It was a classic corporate stalling tactic disguised as a compromise.
Exactly. And the conditions were meticulously designed to be insulting. First, Brando would receive 0 salary up front. He would only get a percentage of the back end.
Which, for those unfamiliar with the term, the back end means an actor only sees a dime if the film actually turns a net profit after all the marketing and production costs are recouped. It shifts all the financial risk onto the actor.
Right, it's a huge risk. Second, any budget overruns caused by Brando's famously erratic on-set behavior would be personally deducted from his share of the profits.
Ouch. And the third condition was the kill shot, right?
Oh, yeah. The studio demanded that Marlon Brando submit to a screen test.
A screen test. This was a man universally hailed as the greatest living actor of his generation, and they wanted him to audition like an unknown drama student.
Exactly. And he was famous for adamantly refusing to ever read for a part.
But Coppola was so desperate to secure him that he executed a brilliant piece of psychological manipulation.
He really did.
He borrowed a video camera, flew to Brando's estate in California, and brought along an Italian actor he had selected to play The Undertaker, Bonacera.
Right, and Coppola left the actor outside and went in to chat with Brando alone first.
And Brando was hesitant, unsure if he could credibly play a 65-year-old Sicilian. But Coppola casually framed it not as an audition, but just an experimental makeup test.
Such a smart move. He just suggested they videotape it to see how the lighting looked.
What unfolded in that living room is a foundational myth of modern cinema.
It really is. Brando just organically transitions into the character right in front of the lens.
He takes black shoe polish and casually rubs it into his hair to darken it.
And he grabs wads of Kleenex and stuffs them into his lower cheeks, muttering that he wants the Don to look like a bulldog.
That is just incredible. And the moment Brando finds the physical shape of the character, Coppola springs the trap.
Right. He signals for the other actor to come inside, and the man immediately launches into the opening monologue of the script, the famous "I Believe in America" speech.
And without missing a single beat, Brando drops his voice into a raspy whisper and begins improvising reactions as an aging mafia chief.
Coppola later described watching a vibrant 47-year-old man physically age 20 years before his very eyes.
It gives me chills just thinking about it.
It's amazing. And Coppola took that raw videotape back to Charles Bluedorn, the imposing head of Gulf and Western.
And Bluedorn was so utterly captivated by the performance that he steamrolled over his own studio executives, forcing Evans and Jafford to accept Brando for the role.
Yep. It's also a testament to Coppola's growing savvy that he eventually managed to finesse those impossible financial conditions, securing Brando $50,000 up front anyway.
Wow, so he beat them at their own game.
He really did. But as monumental as that victory was, the battle over casting the Don actually pales in comparison to the vicious boardroom war over casting his youngest son, Michael Corleone.
Yeah, this was the true ideological battleground of the production, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The fight for Michael Corleone highlights a massive shift in cinematic history. The studio was desperate to cast a major traditional white-bread movie star.
They wanted the kind of effortless golden boy appeal that Robert Redford or Ryan O'Neal brought to the screen.
Exactly. Ryan O'Neal had just headlined Love Story for Paramount, which was a colossal hit, so he was a favored choice. They also floated names like Jack Nicholson, Warren Beatty, and bizarrely, Charles Bronson.
Charles Bronson as Michael Corleone, that is a very different movie.
A very different movie. Albert Ruddy, the line producer, was so fiercely dedicated to landing Robert Redford that he utilized a clause in Mario Puzo's screenwriting contract that allowed the producer to dictate specific scenes.
Oh, this is a crazy story.
Right. Ruddy forced Puzo to write a completely gratuitous love scene between Michael and his girlfriend Kay at the very beginning of the script, solely because he believed it would entice Redford to sign on.
And Puzo dutifully wrote the scene, and Redford still passed on the project.
He still passed. Meanwhile, Coppola and Puzo were fixated on an obscure New York stage actor named Al Pacino.
At this point, Pacino was 31 years old and had exactly one major film credit to his name, a gritty addiction drama called The Panic in Needle Park.
And the Paramount executives absolutely despised him.
They argued he was too short. They argued he looked far too authentically Italian for a character who was supposed to represent the Ivy League, highly assimilated, Americanized future of the Corleone family.
Yeah, Robert Evans notoriously and repeatedly referred to him in meetings as that midget Pacino.
That is just so harsh.
It's brutal. And the studio's resistance went beyond mere physical aesthetics. It was heavily reinforced by Pacino's actual screen tests, which were, according to everyone present, disastrous.
Really? Al Pacino had terrible screen tests.
Oh, awful. He tested alongside Diane Keaton in the wedding sequence. He was visibly vibrating with anxiety, he forgot his lines, and when he attempted to improvise to save the scene, it fell entirely flat.
Oh, man.
Even Coppola, who was risking his own job to advocate for Pacino, was caught muttering that the actor was a self-destructive bastard for failing to simply learn the dialogue.
Okay, this is where we have to pause and analyze the psychology of a director's vision.
Sure.
Why on earth did a guy who was visibly crumbling under the pressure of an audition keep getting called back?
It's a great point.
Paramount forced Pacino through 3 grueling, humiliating rounds of screen tests. To put it in perspective, James Cassina also tested for the role of Michael.
Yes, he did.
Caden showed up in a full Marine uniform, complained bitterly about how stiff and uncomfortable the collar was, and yet even Mario Puzo thought Caden delivered a better audition than Pacino.
Yeah, Caken was great.
So what specific quality did Coppola see in Pacino that the entire corporate apparatus of Paramount Pictures was blind to?
Well, it really comes down to a clash between two fundamentally different philosophies of filmmaking. You have the fading golden age of Hollywood versus the rising new Hollywood movement.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
So Paramount wanted movie star charisma. They wanted a protagonist the audience could comfortably, easily root for in a traditional heroic sense. Redford would have made Michael's descent into darkness feel like an anomaly.
Right.
Coppola, however, was hunting for authentic ethnic intensity. He recognized a profound internal brooding in Pacino, a quiet, almost reptilian intelligence.
That reptilian intelligence, that's such a good way to describe it.
Right. Coppola knew that to make the tragedy work, the audience had to believe that this Dartmouth-educated war hero always had a ruthless, cold-blooded mafia don lurking beneath his skin.
And Coppola's relentless stubbornness in this specific casting fight didn't just win Pacino the role, it radically redefined the entire aesthetic and tone of the film.
Exactly. By casting Pacino, Coppola shifted the movie away from a glossy, superficial Hollywood gangster picture and anchored it as a dark, morally ambiguous familial tragedy.
But the war over Pacino dragged out so long that Coppola was still frantically screen testing 30 new actors just 7 weeks before principal photography was scheduled to begin.
Yeah, burning through vital pre-production time.
The stalemate only broke when Coppola flew to England to consult with Brando on the script. While he was out of the country, Evans finally threw his hands up and relented on Pacino.
And as an absurd side note, the moment Pacino signed, MGM immediately slapped him with a lawsuit.
Oh, right, because they claimed he had verbally committed to starring in a comedy called The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight.
Yes. Pacino actually lost the suit and had to pay MGM's court costs out of his own pocket just to clear his schedule for The Godfather.
That is just miserable. And you can clearly see how this grueling, contentious casting process bled into the psychology of the actors on set.
Oh, absolutely. Pacino confessed years later that he arrived at the studio every single day feeling deeply, profoundly unwanted by the crew and the executives.
Which is heartbreaking.
It is. He would watch minor crew members get fired for small infractions, and he would nervously ask the remaining staff, "Am I still here? Did they fire me yet?" The existential anxiety was suffocating.
And that anxiety was compounded by the fact that the supporting cast was this incredibly volatile, bizarre mix of people.
Very true.
James Caan, having lost the role of Michael, gets shifted over to play the exclusive older brother, Sonny.
Right.
Robert Duvall beats out actors like Martin Sheen to play Tom Hagen, the adopted Irish-German consigliere.
Yeah.
But beyond the trained professionals, the studio and Coppola agreed to cast complete unknowns with absolutely zero acting experience, purely for their authentic aesthetic.
This is a crucial element of the film's texture. They populated the background and supporting roles with individuals whose real lives were deeply enmeshed in the exact culture the film was attempting to portray.
Like Gianni Russo.
Exactly. Take Gianni Russo, who was cast as Carlo Rizzi, the abusive, treacherous husband of Connie Corleone.
Russo was not an actor at all.
Yeah, not at all. He was a Las Vegas nightclub MC and a jewelry tycoon who allegedly had deep connections to the underworld. He arrived at his audition in a chauffeur-driven Bentley demanding a screen test.
The story of his screen test is just wild.
It's insane.
They asked Russo to act out a physical altercation with a secretary who was standing in for his fictional wife. In the middle of the scene, the producers decided to take a 2-hour lunch break, leaving Russo cooling his heels.
Which was a huge mistake on their part.
Yeah, Russo, a man used to absolute due deference, got so genuinely furious about being made to wait that when they finally resumed the test, he completely lost his temper.
Completely lost it.
He aggressively grabbed the secretary, shoved her across the desk, knocked over chairs. He was in a legitimate, terrifying rage. And the producers just yelled, "Stop! You got the part!"
He literally assaulted a stand-in out of pure ego, and it landed him a starring role in a Hollywood picture.
It's unbelievable.
And Russo was so wealthy and boastful that he actually spent $250,000 of his own money hiring personal publicists to promote his acting debut.
That's hilarious. And then you look at Lenny Montana, who played the terrifying loyal enforcer Luca Brasi.
Oh, Lenny is a great story.
Montana was a massive man, 6'6", 320 pounds, who was formerly a world heavyweight professional wrestler known as the Zebra Kid, and who allegedly did real-world enforcement work.
Right, and this was his first time ever stepping in front of a movie camera.
Or Alex Rocco, who played the Jewish casino owner Mo Green, who was actually Italian-American and heavily implied in interviews that he had spent time in prison.
So Coppola succeeds in assembling this incredibly combustible mix of highly trained method actors, complete novices, and guys who essentially walked off the street from the actual mob.
It's a miracle they got anything done.
Truly. But winning the casting battle didn't mean Coppola had won the war, which brings us to the actual production of the film.
Right. Paramount's retaliation for Coppola, forcing this risky cast down their throats, was to breathe down his neck every single day.
Yeah.
They turned the movie set into an active, hostile battleground.
The antagonism between the two camps was palpable. You had the Bohemians, led by Coppola and his young artistic crew, constantly clashing with the corporate moneymen, the studio suits.
And Robert Evans' proxy on the set was a man named Jack Ballard, Paramount's notoriously rigid head of physical production.
Yeah, Ballard and Coppola loathed each other on a molecular level. It was a fundamental clash of methodologies.
Ballard was a strict company man. His sole objective was bringing the movie in under budget and on schedule. He demanded that Coppola shoot precisely what was written on the script pages, nothing more, nothing less.
But Coppola couldn't do that because he was still essentially writing the movie as they were shooting it.
Exactly.
He was relying heavily on the novel and often just shooting concepts directly out of his head. He would wrap a 14-hour day on set and tell his crew, okay, tonight I'm going to go home and write tomorrow's scenes.
Which is an absolute nightmare for a physical production manager trying to schedule lighting setups and background extras.
Oh, total nightmare. Furthermore, Coppola had a habit of incorporating real-world mistakes into the final cut of the film, which infuriated the studio because it violated standard Hollywood protocol.
A perfect example of this involves Lenny Montana, the massive wrestler playing Luca Brasi.
Right. Montana was genuinely physically terrified of acting opposite Marlon Brando.
I mean, who wouldn't be?
Fair point. But during their crucial scene where Brasi pledges his loyalty to the Don on the day of his daughter's wedding, Montana froze. He fumbled his lines, stumbled over his words, and looked like a nervous child.
Now, under normal studio conditions, Jack Ballard would demand they reset the lights and do 20 retakes until the ex-wrestler delivered the lines flawlessly.
Of course, that's standard practice.
But Coppola saw the magic in the mistake. He realized that if a 300-pound professional enforcer was trembling in front of Vito Corleone, it made the Don look exponentially more powerful and terrifying.
It's brilliant.
So Coppola kept the blown take. To make it work in the narrative, he later went back and filmed a completely new scene of Luca Brasi standing outside in the garden, obsessively rehearsing his speech to himself.
Which is such a memorable scene.
Right. By doing that, the stumble in front of Brando suddenly looked like a brilliant, intentional character choice about a man cracking under the pressure of meeting his idol rather than an amateur actor forgetting his lines.
It was a stroke of directorial genius that heightened the hyper-realism of the film. But to the executives watching the daily footage, it just looked like a director who had completely lost control of his cast and was settling for incompetence.
And this ideological war over how to make a movie reached a boiling point during an incident the crew referred to as the Sunset Fight.
The Sunset Fight is legendary.
They were shooting the massive, sprawling Staten Island wedding sequence that opens the film. This sequence required 4 full days of shooting, a specially baked 6-foot-tall cake, gallons of actual wine, and hundreds of extras corralled in a backyard.
A huge logistical undertaking.
Huge. And it's the end of a grueling day. The sun is rapidly dropping below the horizon, just a big red ball in the sky, and they are losing the natural light required for the scene.
The line producer, Gray Fredrickson, informs Coppola that they have no choice but to wrap for the day.
Makes sense. You need light to shoot.
But Jack Ballard, representing the studio schedule, marches over and demands to know why the cameras have stopped rolling.
And when Fredrickson explains they lost the sun, Ballard condescendingly barks. Use lights. Just pump the artificial lights in. That's what we do in Hollywood. Do it like the big boys do.
Oh, man, and Coppola just completely erupts. He starts screaming at the top of his lungs, surrounded by hundreds of extras, accusing Ballard and the studio of not giving a damn about the artistic integrity of the film, caring only about their rigid schedules and their bottom line.
Meanwhile, the cinematographer, Gordon Willis, who earned the nickname the Prince of Darkness for his revolutionary use of deep shadows, and who constantly fought with Coppola himself over camera placement, decides to make a point.
I love this part.
Out of pure spite toward the studio suit, Willis starts loudly ordering his electric crew to set up for the next shot, even though every professional on set knows it will be pitch black by the time the massive lights are rigged.
Right, they just kept prepping in the dark, performing a pantomime of filmmaking, until Ballard finally had to concede defeat and send everyone home.
That kind of spiteful, toxic environment was entirely fueled by an atmosphere of intense paranoia.
Oh, extreme paranoia.
Coppola was living in a constant state of existential dread, genuinely terrified that he was going to be fired before lunch every single day.
And the studio actively stoked this fear. Coppola had hired 4 editors to cut the film, but Paramount dispatched 2 of their own editors from the West Coast to supervise.
So you have 6 different editors hacking away at the footage, which is a recipe for narrative disaster.
It's like trying to bake a delicate, complex souffle while 5 other chefs have their hands in the mixing bowl, and 2 of them have been secretly hired by the restaurant owner to intentionally ruin the dish so they can fire you.
That is a stressful kitchen.
Exactly. Coppola became deeply paranoid, legitimately believing that one of his own chosen editors, a man named Aram Avakian, was secretly plotting with the studio to usurp his position as director.
And Coppola's paranoia was entirely justified because Paramount was actively hunting for his replacement.
They absolutely were. The studio executives were reviewing the rushes, the raw, unedited footage from the first few days of shooting, and they were deeply unhappy.
What were they so upset about?
Well, they looked at the scene shot outside the Best & Co. department store, where Michael and Kay are Christmas shopping.
Oh, yeah.
The production had expected natural snow flurries, which didn't materialize, forcing them to use loud, artificial snowblowers that ruined the audio and made the footage look chaotic.
Ah, I see.
So to the studio, the rushes looked dark, mumbled, and amateurish.
And Robert Evans panicked to such a degree that he picked up the phone and called Ilya Kazan.
Billy Kazan.
Now, Elie Kazan was a cinematic titan. He directed On the Waterfront and A Streetcar Named Desire. He was widely considered the only director alive who could successfully manage Marlon Brando's ego.
Right, and Evans essentially asked Kazan if he would be willing to fly to New York and take over the movie.
The only reason Coppola wasn't fired that week was due to a bizarre piece of Hollywood politicking.
Thank goodness for Peter Bart.
Yeah, Peter Bart, another executive at Paramount, who was actually one of Coppola's few internal champions, managed to sabotage the coup.
Right. Bart happened to run into a production designer named Dick Silbert, who casually mentioned he had just had a conversation with Kazan. Silbert noted that Kazan seemed a bit out of it, perhaps a little senile.
And Bart seized the opportunity. He immediately grabbed Silbert, marched him into Robert Evans's office, and asked him to repeat the claim about Kazan's mental state.
Evans, terrified of replacing a young, chaotic director with an aging, senile one, got spooked. He called Kazan's agent, canceled the inquiry, and decided to stick with the devil he knew in Coppola.
But Coppola knew they were making these calls. Imagine the psychological toll of that workplace environment.
It's unbearable.
You are trying to execute the most complex, high-stakes artistic endeavor of your life, working on 4 hours of sleep, and your corporate boss is literally standing behind the camera, holding the resume of the legend they're about to replace you with.
Coppola confessed he was having vivid night terrors about Elia Kazan walking onto the set, tapping him on the shoulder and saying, "Francis, I've been asked by the studio to take over."
That is harrowing.
But what is truly fascinating from a cinematic perspective is how this environment of constant existential dread actively fueled the artistic quality of the movie.
How so?
Well, the palpable tension you see on screen, the quiet paranoia of Michael Corleone, the suffocating atmosphere of the Corleone compound, wasn't just great acting. It was the very real physical manifestation of a director fighting for his artistic survival and casting that anxiety onto his actors.
Well, that makes so much sense.
The pressure cooked the performances into diamonds, and Coppola, pushed to the brink, started rebelling in incredibly petty ways.
Like what?
During the stressful editing process, he began coming to work wearing a T-shirt with Warner Brothers, boldly stenciled across the chest, solely to antagonize the Paramount executives who were spying on him.
That is wonderfully petty. And his temper, usually kept in check, began to fracture in spectacular ways, right?
Oh, definitely. There was a legendary argument between Coppola and his equally stubborn cinematographer, Gordon Willis.
What happened?
Willis was insisting a specific camera move was technically impossible and yelled that Coppola didn't know how to do anything right. Coppola screamed in order to do the shot anyway. The camera crew, loyal to Willis, crossed their arms and refused to move.
Oh, wow. Mutiny on the set.
Exactly. And Coppola completely lost it. He screamed, "I've directed 5 fucking movies without anyone telling me how to do it." He spun around, rushed upstairs to his makeshift office, and slammed the door behind him with incredible force.
And according to a student film observer who was granted access to the set that day, the crew suddenly heard a massive echoing crack from upstairs that sounded exactly like a gunshot.
Yes.
The entire crew froze. They genuinely thought the pressure had finally broken him and he had taken his own life.
The silence on set was deafening. A few agonizing moments later, a member of Coppola's personal staff calmly walked down the stairs, approached the crew, and politely asked if 2 carpenters could go upstairs to install a completely new door on Mr. Coppola's office.
In his blind rage, the director had literally punched and kicked the solid wooden door into splinters.
Which provides the perfect transition into the bizarre coping mechanisms developed by the cast.
Oh, we have to talk about this. With the director fighting a corporate war upstairs and smashing doors to pieces, and the actors feeling the crushing, suffocating weight of this high-stakes production, the cast desperately needed a release valve.
They absolutely did.
And their chosen method for blowing off steam was engaging in literal, unbelievable frat house antics. We have to discuss the great Godfather Mooning Championship.
It sounds entirely apocryphal, like a myth invented by a publicist years later, but it's extensively documented. The psychological pressure cooker required an extreme release.
It started with James Carine, didn't it?
Yeah, it started with Canarin. He is an incredibly energetic, kinetic guy, and he noticed how brutally uptight everyone on set had become. Coppola was a nervous wreck, Pacino looked physically ill from the stress of thinking he was going to be fired, and the crew was walking on eggshells around Brando.
So what did you?
So during a tense rehearsal for a scene with the actor playing the Undertaker, Bonacera, Canarian simply dropped his pants and mooned Coppola and Brando.
And initially, neither the stressed-out director nor the method-acting legend thought it was remotely funny.
Not at first, no. But then, some psychological dam broke and it caught like wildfire. Suddenly, everyone in the cast is engaging in this bizarre game of exhibitionist one-upmanship.
Robert Duvall joins in, Brando joins in.
Yeah.
Even the famously introverted, moody Al Pacino occasionally participates.
The actor Richard Bright, who played the Corleone enforcer El Neri, gave an interview where he stated it got to the point where every time you opened a closet door on set or opened a prop refrigerator, there was an actor's bare backside waiting for you.
That is just surreal.
It became a tactical game. Duvall once walked onto the soundstage, carefully checking every corner and shadow to make sure he wouldn't be ambushed, only to have Richard Bright hang completely upside down from the lighting rafters and drop his pants right over Duvall's head, screaming, "Gotcha!"
My favorite image from the entire production is the story of Marlon Brando and Robert Duvall running backward down a narrow studio hallway, both with their pants around their ankles, trying to see who could back up faster until their bare behinds physically collided.
It's hilarious.
These are grown men, acclaimed artists, absolutely losing their minds. They even commissioned an actual championship belt, a hand-tooled leather belt inscribed with the words, Moon Champion.
And Brando, ever the competitor, ultimately won the belt.
How did he win it?
During the massive, grueling Staten Island wedding shoot, he and Duvall arranged a final showdown to see who could pull off the most audacious moon. Brando secured his victory by dropping his pants in front of a massive crowd of elderly Italian women who had been hired from the local neighborhood as background extras.
Oh my goodness.
James Kotkanian recalled watching these traditional Catholic old ladies gasp in horror, crossing themselves, and pretending they didn't just see the greatest actor of his generation exposing himself.
But the pranks went far beyond mooning. They were constantly engineering physical gags to mess with each other.
Right, the stretcher prank.
There's a scene in the film where Vito Corleone, having survived the assassination attempt, is brought back to his home in an ambulance. Coppola asked several real, muscle-bound medical orderlies to carry Brando up a narrow flight of stairs on a stretcher.
Yeah.
While the actors were away in the makeup trailer, Brando secretly instructed the crew to load the underside of the stretcher with lead weights. Depending on which crew member is telling the story, it was either 300 pounds or a full 1,000 pounds of solid lead.
A ridiculous amount of weight, either way.
The cameras roll, these beefy Musclemen swagger out, confidently grab the handles of the stretcher, take exactly 4 steps up the incline, scream in agony, and immediately drop the stretcher, sending Brando tumbling onto the stairs.
And it completely broke the tension on set for the rest of the day. But I think what's truly fascinating is that Brando's actual professional acting process was just as chaotic and unpredictable as his pranks.
He famously, adamantly refused to memorize his lines.
Right. Exactly. His philosophical justification for this was that in real life, people don't know what they're going to say next. Words come as a surprise, we search for them, we stumble. He argued that if an actor memorizes a script perfectly, the delivery becomes theatrical and stale.
I had to push back on that logic.
Yeah.
As an expert looking at film history, isn't that just a convenient excuse for being incredibly lazy and unprofessional?
It's a fair point to raise.
Does refusing to learn your dialogue, taping your lines to a melon, and relying on cue cards actually make you a better actor? Or were the studio executives right to be terrified of his work ethic?
It's a highly debated point, but in the specific context of The Godfather, it resulted in sheer brilliance. Let's look at the mechanics of it. Because Brando didn't know his lines, he had cue cards hidden everywhere on the set.
Right.
They were taped to scenery, hidden behind lamps, printed on props. As you mentioned, Coppola once noticed Brando handling a piece of fruit very strangely during a take, and upon closer inspection realized Brando had taped his dialogue to the melon.
It's crazy.
He would even have the crew tape his lines to the chests of the other actors so he could read them off their bodies while the camera was doing a close-up on his
And
face.
he would use those takes to pull practical
He
jokes.
loved messing with the crew.
Richard Bright recalled a moment where Brando was filming a highly emotional 3-minute master shot,
Yeah.
a long, uninterrupted take in the Don's den. Brando was delivering this incredibly subtle, powerful performance.
Okay, yeah.
When Coppola finally yells, "Cut!" everyone on the crew exhales, thinking they just witnessed cinematic perfection. Then Brando slowly turns to the camera, looks down at his chest, and says, "Shoo! Shoo!"
Because of the bird.
He had taken a small, stuffed taxidermy bird and wired it to his lapel, playing out the entire dramatic, tragic scene with a dead bird hanging off his suit jacket just to see if anyone would notice.
That is classic Brando. But to answer your question about whether this chaos made for better art, yes, it absolutely did. What Brando, Caan, and Duvall were doing, the mooning, the pranks, the refusal to treat the text as a sacred document, was an elaborate subconscious method of team building.
Really, just team building.
Think about it. By engaging in these ridiculous frat house antics, they completely shattered the suffocating reverence that usually surrounds a serious Hollywood drama. They stopped treating each other like esteemed colleagues and started treating each other like annoying, deeply affectionate brothers.
Oh, I see.
That messy, chaotic chemistry translated directly into the Corleone family dynamic. When you see Sonny, Michael, and Tom Hagen arguing on screen, the warmth, the irritation, and the familiarity are profoundly genuine because they were living that exact dynamic the second the camera stopped rolling.
So the lack of professionalism actually generated the realism.
Exactly. And Brando's refusal to memorize lines forced a hyper-realistic, hesitant acting style. When you watch his performance, he is constantly searching the room for his words, literally looking for his cue cards. But on film, it translates as a powerful, aging Don who is thoughtful, careful, and deeply authentic.
Because he speaks deliberately like he doesn't want to make a mistake.
Right. That technique essentially revolutionized cinematic acting by permanently destroying the polished, theatrical, rapid-fire delivery of the past.
Speaking of destroying the polished Hollywood aesthetic, we have to talk about the most infamous prop in cinema history, the horse head.
Oh, the horse head.
For those who haven't seen the film recently, the studio producer who crosses the Corleone family wakes up in his silk sheets to find the severed head of his prized million-dollar racehorse bleeding in his bed.
It's a shocking scene.
Now, the legendary makeup wizard Dick Smith, who aged Brando and created the incredible gore effects for the film, initially tried to do this the traditional Hollywood way. He built a fake stuffed horse head, utilizing 2 gallons of homemade prop blood mixed from Caro syrup and red food coloring.
It was a valiant effort, but when Coppola looked at it through the camera lens, he immediately rejected it.
Why?
He felt the fake fur and the syrupy blood looked entirely phony and lacked the visceral, horrifying shock required to make the audience understand the sheer ruthlessness of the mafia.
So they didn't just tweak the fake head, they went nuclear. The production literally sourced a real, freshly severed horse head from a commercial slaughterhouse in New Jersey.
Just horrifying to think about.
The slaughterhouse packed the massive bloody head in dry ice and shipped it directly to the soundstage. They threw this frozen, thawing, real animal head into the bed for the actor, John Marley, to react to.
So his reaction.
The sheer primal terror on Marley's face in that scene is largely genuine because he is screaming at a real decaying piece of anatomy. Once they got the shot, the crew packed the head back up in a crate and somewhat ironically shipped it off to the SPCA.
Which predictably caused a massive nationwide public outcry. Animal rights activists were furious. People were sending death threats to Coppola over the horse.
It's over the horse!
Yeah, it highlights a fascinating moral disconnect in the audience. People were vastly more traumatized and outraged by the implication that a horse was killed than they were by the fact that nearly 30 human beings are brutally, graphically murdered on screen over the course of the film.
That is a wild observation. And that bizarre blurring of lines between the movie and reality is the perfect bridge into our final exploration. How fiction bled into reality.
It's a huge part of the story.
Because the violence, the tension, and the mob politics weren't just contained to Mario Puzo's script or the Paramount sound stages. The real world and the fictional world of The Godfather were constantly, dangerously colliding.
The most famous and perhaps most volatile collision involved the original author, Mario Puzo, and the legendary singer, Frank Sinatra.
Right. It was an open secret in Hollywood. and a firm belief held by Sinatra himself that the character of Johnny Fontaine was directly based on him.
Exactly. Fontaine is the washed-up crooner who goes to the Don in tears, begging for a favor to secure a movie role that will revitalize his failing career, which heavily mirrors the rumors surrounding Sinatra landing his Oscar-winning role in From Here to Eternity.
And Sinatra was fiercely protective of his image and deeply connected to some very real, very dangerous people.
Yes, he was.
While Puzo was working on the screenplay in Los Angeles, he attended a high society dinner party at Chasen's, which was the elite, quintessential Hollywood restaurant of the era. The host of the dinner, a prominent millionaire, spotted Sinatra sitting at a nearby table.
Uh-oh.
Desperate to show off his connections, the millionaire insisted on introducing Puzo to the singer, despite Puzo explicitly and repeatedly declining the offer, knowing how angry Sinatra was about the book.
The millionaire ignores Puzo's warnings, drags him over to the table, and loudly announces, "Frank, I'd like you to meet my good friend, Mario Puzo."
How did Sinatra react?
Sinatra doesn't even pause. He immediately snaps, "I don't think so."
Yeah.
The millionaire, realizing his catastrophic mistake, is literally brought to tears, stammering apologies. But Sinatra is relentless. He launches into a vicious, humiliating tirade against Puzo.
The detail that makes this story so incredible is that Sinatra never even looked up from his plate of food. He just aggressively kept eating while shouting abuse, calling Puzo a pimp, accusing him of exploiting Italian-American heritage for a quick buck, and explicitly stating that if Puzo wasn't so much older and physically fragile, he would personally beat the hell out of him right there in the restaurant.
Puzo, who possessed a brilliant, cynical mind, later noted the profound historical irony of the situation. He pointed out the deep cultural divide in Italy between the wealthy, aristocratic North and the poorer, agrarian South.
Right, the North-South divide.
Sinatra's family hailed from northern Italy, while Puzo was proudly southern Italian. Puzo famously recounted the incident by saying it was roughly equivalent to Einstein pulling a knife on Al Capone. He was a writer being physically threatened by a singer over a fictional story about gangsters.
It is the ultimate example of life imitating art, which is then imitating life. And it gets even more surreal because the actual real-life mafia the men Puzo was writing about were deeply, obsessively invested in the production of this movie.
That's the craziest part to me.
We know this for a fact because the FBI was running active wiretaps on various high-ranking mafia members during the early 1970s. When the FBI agents reviewed the tapes, they discovered that the mobsters weren't just talking about extortion or gambling, they were actively debating the casting choices of The Godfather.
The wiretaps revealed a fascinating psychological insight into how the criminal underworld viewed itself. When debating who should play the handsome, deadly, Ivy League-educated Michael Corleone, the real-life mobster's overwhelming top choice was Paul Newman.
Paul Newman, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed epitome of traditional American movie star cool.
Exactly. It shows that the mafia didn't see themselves as gritty, marginalized street thugs. They viewed themselves as classic, all-American anti-heroes. They wanted the Hollywood glamour.
That's fascinating.
But what Coppola and Puzo ultimately created did something far more profound. It completely recontextualized the mafia in the broader public consciousness, and incredibly, it recontextualized the mafia in their own consciousness.
Wait, what do you mean?
Following the release of the film, real-world mobsters began dressing better, utilizing the language of the film like consigliere, and adopting the tragic, operatic nobility that Brando and Pacino projected on screen.
The movie literally became the cultural blueprint for the organization it was depicting.
It really did.
And it achieved that monumental status because it wasn't just a cheap thriller. It was structured as an intricate, sprawling, generational saga. I think audiences often forget, because they get swept up in the pacing, just how massive a timeline this single film covers. It doesn't take place over a few weeks. It spans a decade of American history.
Pinning down the exact timeline of the narrative reveals the sheer, ambitious scope of what Coppola and Puzo managed to compress into a 3-hour film. The story opens on the last Saturday in August of 1945, amidst the joyous, crowded celebration of Connie's wedding, just as World War II is ending. Just a few months later, in the bitter cold of December 1945, Vito is gunned down in the street, shattering the peace. The pivot point of the entire saga, Michael's revenge at the Italian restaurant in the Bronx, where he executes the rival mobster Solozzo and the corrupt police captain, McCluskey, kicks off the brutal Five Families War in early 1946.
That double murder forces Michael to flee the country, sending him into exile in the hills of Sicily in March of 1946.
Yes.
He is trapped there for years, wandering the landscape, while back in New York, his volatile brother Sonny is running the family business into the ground. We know time is passing because of subtle historical cues. Sonny is eventually ambushed and assassinated at the toll booth around late 1948 or early 1949.
How do we know the exact year there?
We can pinpoint this because during an earlier scene where Sonny viciously beats up Carlo in the street, there's a faded Thomas Dewey presidential campaign poster visible on a brick wall. And Dewey famously ran against Truman in the 1948 election.
Wow, that is an incredible level of detail. And the timeline continues to march forward. Michael finally returns to America, tracks down Kay, and they marry around 1951. Don Vito Corleone, having survived the initial assassination attempt and brokered a fragile peace, finally succumbs to a heart attack while playing with his grandson in his tomato garden in 1954.
And then the film's breathtaking climax, the famous baptism sequence where Michael renounces Satan in the church, brilliantly interwoven with the synchronized brutal execution of the heads of the 5 families, takes place around 1955.
Over a decade of violent, transformative American history seamlessly packed into one cohesive narrative. By anchoring the story in the sprawling timeline, Puzo and Coppola elevated what could have been a pulpy, sensationalist crime novel into the definitive American tragedy. They built a mythology.
And that undeniable achievement is exactly what makes the behind-the-scenes chaos so profoundly fascinating to dissect. If we analyze the mechanics of how this film was actually produced, according to every logical metric of the Hollywood studio system, it should not have worked.
It should have been a complete disaster.
Let's review the ingredients of this supposed disaster. You have a film property that the studio actively despised and wanted to shoot on the cheap. You hand it to a young, inexperienced director who is drowning in hundreds of thousands of dollars of personal debt.
Right.
You force him to cast actors that nobody in corporate power wanted, including a washed-up, uncooperative legend and an unknown, anxious stage actor.
The production is plagued by daily corporate sabotage, screamed arguments over lighting, and the constant threat of the director being fired and replaced by Elia Kazan.
The real-world mafia is threatening the author, the FBI is wiretapping the culture, and the cast's primary coping mechanism for the suffocating stress is pulling down their pants and hiding cue cards on fruit.
And yet somehow, through some inexplicable alchemy of pressure, talent, and sheer spite, all of that toxic chaos resulted in the definitive American cinematic masterpiece.
It's amazing.
It is a genuine miracle that the film was ever finished and shipped to theaters, let alone that it went on to shatter box office records and win 3 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Actor for Brando, and Best Adapted Screenplay for Puzo and Coppola.
Which brings up a truly fascinating philosophical question about the nature of art. If art is truly a mirror of its creation, does the treacherous, high-stakes, backstabbing world of the Corleone family perfectly reflect the treacherous, high-stakes, backstabbing world of making the movie?
It's an incredible parallel to consider. The ruthless politics of the Paramount boardroom were seamlessly translated into the ruthless politics of the 5 families.
That is the thought I want to leave you, the listener, to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive. Could The Godfather have only become a masterpiece because the people making it were living through their own ruthless, unpredictable war with the studio?
That's a great question.
Would a peaceful, well-funded, easily controlled set have produced a safe, forgettable movie? Let that sink in the next time you hear that iconic, sweeping waltz theme by Nino Rota. Because beneath that beautiful, tragic music is the sound of a desperate director smashing a solid wooden door to splinters, an actor hiding his dialogue on a melon, and a studio executive trying to burn the whole thing down.